Watch this vidcast, or I'll gouge your eyes out.
Welcome back, Horror Hounds, to Ghostman and Rivera's Horror Show podcast.
I'm Mike Ghostman Pickle.
And I'm James Rivera. We're going to get started with
Horror Show News.
All right, even more news on James Wan's 10th feature, which is a giallo horror film titled Malignant.
Bill Moseley and Bill Oberst Jr. to star in Devil's Junction.
Creepshow is now streaming its first episode on Shudder.
Life imitates horror as real-life orphan story comes to life. That would be the movie The Orphan.
And we're extremely sad to report that the legendary actor Sid Haig is dead at 80.
Yes, we're going to touch on that more a little bit later.
Yeah, we're going to have a little tribute to him later. We're going to talk a little bit about his career. And we watched a couple more of his movies this past week after he died. And we just so happened to watch, 3 of his movies just before he died?
Yes, right before he died, right before the announcement came, I had just seen House of a Thousand Corpses 2 hours before.
Because we loved him and the movie so much, not just because he was dead or dying, you know?
Yeah.
We've been fixated on that man for years.
So, very sad day.
We're once again reporting on James Wan's new film. It now has an official title, Malignant, and it's supposed to be a giallo film. Principal photography kicked off on Tuesday, September 24th, and the plot details are being kept under wraps, but the film is said to be influenced by Argento classics like Deep Red and The Girl with Crystal Plumage, and also Fulci's Don't Torture a Duckling. The cast includes Maddie Hassan, Annabelle Wallace, Jack Abel, George Young, Nicole Brianna White, and Jacqueline McKenzie.
I really like the idea behind this because I don't think he's never done anything in the way of giallo horror before. And let's be honest, that's kind of a dead subgenre of horror. That's at this point, I don't really see anybody practicing the giallo style. The exaggerated blood, the colorful kill scenes, the Argento-like staging of everything.
Yeah, and once again, we learn a little bit more about James Wan's new film, and as I guessed, it's making me even more excited for it.
I'm pretty surprised. I suppose I was expecting something in the way of supernatural horror again, but it's interesting to see him to take a step in another direction.
He's concentrating all practical effects and all real locations, no sound stages or anything. So he really wants to go back to his roots and do like a lower budget thing with more imagination.
And if you're going to do something like a giallo, since its heyday was in the 70s and like the 80s and a lot of it, 60s, 70s, and 80s actually, when a lot of it was focused on practical effects, violence, and gore makeup in the way that it kind of wallows in the details,
yeah,
I don't picture CGI giallo going over very well. And for those who don't know, a giallo is a specific type of horror film. It was originated in Italy, and it usually involves some sort of murder mystery. The biggest feature of it is just the use of blood and the killings. It's almost fetishistic in its gore, makes the blood look really pretty and glossy, and a lot of attention paid to aesthetics. Very, I would say, a lot of style with giallo horror film, but it's not something you see very often anymore.
And I could see James Wan doing that well because he's a very visual director.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he's gotten a bad rap because his films have become more and more polished with each one.
Mm-hmm.
And they're very crowd-pleasing films, but they also have some depth and some layers and some attention to detail. And I think this will help solidify his
horror
place.
Bonafides.
Yeah, his place among horror fans, especially since the Conjuring movies expanded into a universe where every single movie in that universe besides the Conjuring movies are inferior to them. Like greatly inferior, and now they're being lumped in. So I'm glad he's going to do another horror film that sets him apart a little bit while he's doing these big superhero films.
Listen to this podcast, or I'll gut you.
Bill Moseley and Bill Oberst Jr. are to star in Devil's Junction. This is the plot synopsis of this movie. Returning to the abandoned Detroit television station where they once delighted a generation of children's viewers, master puppeteer Mr. Jolly reincarnates his minion puppets for a final performance to settle an old score with Richard. The rare blood moon casts an ominous glow as Mr. Jolly unleashes his puppets. led by the infamous Handy Dandy to seek his revenge. Further complicating Richard's dilemma is the unexpected arrival to the studio of his son, Stefan, and his friends. The group becomes entangled in the thrilling pursuit by Mr. Jolly and Handy Dandy through the annals of the old studio building. They soon realize that they are in a new version of Mr. Jolly and the Handy Dandy Show, where the pain is the game. This is pretty unusual idea for a horror movie. I know it's supposed to be a puppet horror movie.
Yeah.
Which I didn't even expect Bill Moseley or Bill Oberst Jr. to make that kind of film or to make that kind of horror film.
Yeah.
And of course, it's going to be a very limited release. It's only going to be in selected LA theaters on October 18th and October 19th, and on demand and physical media set for November 5th.
And I'm guessing Bill Oberst Jr. plays Mr. Jolly.
Yeah, from what I understand, he seems to be the main character, the antagonist, the villain. Even though Bill Moseley seems to get his name advertised first in this, I think it's just more because of name recognition.
Yeah, and I guess Bill Moseley looks like he's going to be a protagonist
this time.
I was kind of hoping it'd be Bill Oberst Jr. and Bill Moseley as both villains, but...
I mean, Bill Moseley usually plays... We know him mostly as, like, Otis and Chop Top, mostly as a villain, so it'd be interesting to see him take on a different kind of role. What I'm really excited for, though, is Bill Oberst Jr., especially after his performance as Papa Corn the Clown in Circus of the Dead. It was such a great horror movie villain portrayal that he did, and that really ate the screen up. And this one seems like he's going to do the same thing again.
Yeah, and if you get a chance to see Children of Sorrow, starring Bill Oberst Jr. as a cult leader, that is a must-see. It's a found footage film. It's a bit of a shaky cam. It gets a little too shaky sometimes because it's actually real. It's not real. I mean, they play it very real, so the camera is gonna fucking shake when you have your life threatened. So it actually shakes a lot. That's a lot that people have to complain about it. But besides that, Bill Oberst is phenomenal, fucking one of the best cult leaders I've ever seen in that damn movie. That's a must-see. So I'm really excited to see Devil's Junction, to see him mix it up with Bill Moseley again, after he just appeared in 3 from Hell.
Yeah.
So we're going to check out, as we often do, we're going to check out the trailer here on the show.
So this is the trailer of indie horror film Devil's Junction. Lots of gears. Beware. Clocks. What is this to indicate, like puppetry or... Oh no, that's just a...
After all these years, there you stand. I was telling Rosie about this building my dad just bought. He's trying to turn it into condos, but I got a surprise for you guys. Coming back for more. Always more.
Hey, what's all this?
Probably just
Bill Moseley dressed as a
stuff from that kid show
regular
that
guy.
shot there in the 60s.
And
my dad used to watch
it looks
shows
very straight to
live
video, and the
on this very
acting
stage.
seems kind of dry, but
Mr. Jolly and
Bill
the
Oberst looks
Dandy
really good in it.
Yeah.
He always elevates anything he's in.
He was like the star puppet.
That dummy right there, that reminds me of Slappy from Goosebumps.
Yeah.
That puppet.
Those puppets come from
So there's a girl tied up.
Before that, no one really knows. One of my dad's best friends went missing and was never found.
Trust me, the time comes even without the dagger. The Kandarian artifact will have power enough.
Seems to be some rituals involved.
Puppets from that TV show. Don't tie her up.
That's a pretty creepy dummy right there.
Yeah, ventriloquist dummies talking on their own.
How old were you, coward, when you ran away?
Look at Bill Oberst Jr. eating.
Yeah, lots of Bill Oberst Jr. acting his ass off.
Monitors every inch of this building.
We can't just stand here in a little bunch, okay? We're an easy target if somebody's in here with us.
Everything means something to a Mason. You, here, we've been waiting a long time for this night.
That's the voice of the dummy. Ooh, looks like it's gonna get gruesome.
Devil's Junction, Handy Dandy's Revenge.
Let's play, shall we?
All right.
From what I can see in the trailer, it seems like Bill Oberst Jr. is gonna be what elevates the movie, like you said. really eats up the screen.
Yeah.
The presence of those maniacal speeches he seems to be going off on in there.
Next story is Creepshow, the new series from Greg Nicotero, is now streaming on Shudder. First one is going to be a 2-part episode. One of the parts is going to be Gray Matter, and the other one, The House of the Head. Gray Matter is directed by Greg Nicotero, and it's based on a story from Stephen King that appears in the 1978 short story collection Night Shift.
I actually read that a long time ago.
The synopsis of that one is Doc and Chief, 2 old-timers in a small dying town, brave a storm to check on Richie, an alcoholic single father, after encountering his terrified son at the local convenience store. The stars are Giancarlo Esposito, Tobin Bell, and Adrian Barbeau from The Fog.
So Giancarlo Esposito, who is Gus on Breaking Bad and bugging out from Do the Right Thing. And then you got Tobin Bell, of course, Mr. Jigsaw himself, and cult icon Adrian Barbeau from the original Creepshow.
Yeah.
So they really seem like they're really trying to make sure that this is true to Creepshow, because the original one was written by Stephen King, the whole script. It doesn't look like Stephen King actually wrote the script for this. They just based it on his story. Nevertheless, there's a Stephen King connection and the Adrian Barbeau. The one that seems different is The House of the Head.
Yeah, and it's written by Josh Malerman, who wrote Bird Box. And it's directed by John Harrison. And the synopsis is, Evie discovers her new dollhouse might be haunted. And the stars are Carrie Fleming, Rachel Hendricks, Guy Messenger, David Shea, and Diane D. Carter.
I'm surprised that Shudder isn't releasing this in the binge-watching format since it's a streaming series. I've noticed that lately a lot of streaming companies are starting to get back into the old television way of doing things, of airing one episode per week or just making it available, one new one available per week. I wonder if that's just to extend subscriptions, or if they want to build more of the a narrative in a way that builds over time and allow each episode to sit in the viewer's head.
Well, they started doing that with Joe Bob Briggs on there. They started making it an event because Joe Bob wanted to make it where people gathered around your TV at a certain time and watch something again, instead of having it so readily available to stream at any time.
That people just tune in whenever.
It kind of takes the community away from watching horror movies. So they started doing that with him, where they each week they premiere an episode at a certain time. It's been successful for them so far.
We both attended Son of Monster Palooza recently, and we got to see a little panel on Creepshow that Greg Nicotero introduced in a new trailer. All of the footage looks really good. All the on-set stories sound like they had a lot of fun making this, and it's very clearly a labor of love.
Sounds like a lot of practical effects, and it sounds like they approached it in the same way that the old one was. It did. They didn't try to approach it in a modern way.
Yeah, it still keeps the old aesthetic. And what's interesting is that Stephen King actually submitted a different short story for them to adapt. But due to budget limitations, it was going to take place on an island, that they couldn't do it. And Greg Nicotero didn't want to fake that, so he had to ask Stephen King to send in another story.
Okay.
Yeah, and he thought he was being a pain in the ass when he did it.
So try again, Mr. King.
Yeah, so this was actually the second. So I guess it was just the budget limitation. So it's still, it seems like they're trying to work very well within the budget limitations that they have. And most of that horror from the 80s and Creepshow, what they're trying to emulate, wasn't that high budget in the first place.
Yeah.
So it's probably better that they restrain themselves to stay true to the spirit of Creepshow.
It sure looks like from the trailers that they showed that they are going to capture the spirit, especially all the practical effects and everything. It looks really cool.
So tune in to Creepshow only on Shudder.
You're listening to Ghostman Rivera's Horror Show podcast.
So here's a pretty interesting story. We call this Life Imitates Horror as real life Orphan story comes to life. So of course Orphan was the 2009 horror film about an adopted little girl who is actually had dwarfism, suffering some kind of genetic malady. So they thought she was a little girl, but she was actually a grown woman who was really psychotic and tried to kill the family.
Which was an awesome twist, I thought.
Which is really interesting for a movie, but it appears that a similar case has actually come to life in the United States. A Christian couple in the U.S. adopted a 6-year-old girl from Ukraine in 2010. They claimed to be 6-year-old. She was originally adopted a couple years earlier in 2008, but that adoption did not work out due to undisclosed reasons. When she was adopted again, she was having regular periods, she was using grown-up language, and a bone density test in 2011 proved that she was at least 14, but the age is hard to determine due to the complications of dwarfism and the condition making it hard to determine her actual age. So they couldn't get it too accurate, but she was at least 14 years old when they believed she was 6 or 8.
And that was 2011.
That was 2011, yeah. And according to the mom, Christine, she would make statements. This was a quote from her. She would make statements and draw pictures saying she wanted to kill family members or roll them up in a blanket and put them in the backyard. She was standing over people in the middle of the night. You couldn't go to sleep. I saw her putting chemicals, bleach, glass cleaner, Windex, something like that in my coffee, and I asked her, "What are you doing?" She said, "I'm trying to poison you." She threatened to poison the family's other children in their sleep and pushed the mom, Christine, against an electric fence once. After a lot of this disturbing behavior, she was placed in a psychiatric unit and was released in 2012. After going over a lot of documents, a judge officially ruled her as age 22.
Damn, why is this now coming out?
This is because I think the family is having a little bit of a dispute right now.
Yeah.
Is they're trying to get them for child neglect. But they said she's already been proven to be an adult by that point. She was already ruled an adult into psychotic behavior because after she went into the psychiatric unit, they didn't want her back. Which I guess is pretty understandable considering, I don't know, it would horrify me if I adopted a child and they were trying to kill me or poison my other children or push me into an electric fence. And I don't think that type of that is worth putting your family in danger for that type of psychotic behavior.
Yeah, and how does that turn around to neglect?
I guess it's how one court ruled it.
Oh my lord.
So they're fighting a legal case right now. But yeah, I guess she tried to poison them, and and I guess while she was in the psychiatric unit, they came to the conclusion that she was very deeply troubled and disturbed. This is pretty crazy because Orphan sounds like it's basically that movie we were talking, Come to Life.
Yeah.
Because the idea of Orphan sounds kind of outlandish or over the top. The idea of adopting a little girl, finding she's a homicidal adult.
Yeah.
And for that to happen in real life is actually pretty scary.
And she doesn't look like a dwarf. She looks like a little girl. Mm-hmm. We've seen the picture.
But her face does look a little bit older, though. I guess that's a little bit of a cautionary tale. Adoption is great, and a lot of kids. We're not trying to send a bad message, but just make sure you know all the details when you adopt somebody.
And our final very sad story this week is that legendary actor Sid Haig is dead at 80. We're going to do a little tribute to him later, but first we're going to go over some of the things we watched this week, and then we'll give him a proper tribute after.
We watched the first episode of American Horror Story 1984.
Yeah, I enjoyed it quite a bit.
I liked it a lot. I think this is like the most laid back and funnest they've been in a long time. The past couple I really liked Apocalypse the last season, but the past couple seasons with that and Cult have been like deathly serious and apocalyptic and sort of reflective of current times.
Yeah.
It's nice to settle back into an old school mode of horror, which is that 80s slashers vibe. And I think they really, really nail the 80s in this movie. In the show, in the movie.
Yeah, it had awesome kills. They were gory. But did you notice that a lot of the kills weren't very well choreographed? Like the gore that resulted in the kills and the setup of the kills was very good, but the actual kills weren't very well choreographed. But I believe that might have been on purpose, because if they would have been any more well choreographed, it would have been too graphic for television.
As it is, I'm actually pretty surprised that this is on basic cable, that FX actually aired it, because when the show has one scene of slaughter where multiple people are slaughtered at once. It's fucking brutal and it's violent, and it's something that you'd expect in an R-rated movie or something you'd see on HBO or Showtime. It really pushes to the limit the type of gore that you could see on television. Yeah. And like you said, it wasn't well choreographed, but I honestly do think it was done to avoid having to censor the scene out altogether, because if they made it any clearer, it probably would have been unacceptable for television standards and would have caused controversy. As it is, the show has always been controversial as far as what they can show on the air, and there's been some disputes with parent groups and complaining about the type of content that they push. So I'm actually surprised that they're getting away with this level of gore.
But it's definitely not a complaint on my end. I just noticed that
they had to.
I think they could have, judging by the way the rest of it's filmed, I think they could have filmed the kills better. I just think they weren't able to. They had to cheat them for the most part, because they still did show a lot, like you said, a lot of gore.
This actually has the best opening credits of any season of American Horror Story, because each season has their own unique credits that are related to the specific storyline of that season.
The little title sequence. It's always a similar type of thing in every season, but this one is completely different.
It's the most different from any of the other title sequences. The music that plays, the look of it, even it looks like the title sequences looks like you're watching it on a beat up VHS tape.
Yeah,
which I thought was a pretty cool effect to add to it.
That's what I noticed right from that title sequence, that we've been inundated with a lot of retro 80s stuff, and this is not retro, this is 80s.
Yeah.
You know, it's got the definite 80s aesthetic. It's not somebody going for an 80s look. They get definite shit from the 80s, and that feel.
What I liked about it, and I know this is going to be a complaint for a lot of people, but it is kind of predictable, but in a way that seems extremely intentional as a tribute to the horror genre, to the slasher genre, with the tropes in it, with having the ominous old man warning the people not to go out to the camp because of what's there. You could kind of predict what's going to happen, but it's still fun in the way that the best 80s slasher movies are. And in some ways, it's a little bit more well filmed than some of those 80s slasher movies are. Yeah,
it's well filmed, and the slasher stories, they have a couple different little campfire stories, and just in that first episode, and they're both really good.
I also like the incorporation of Richard Ramirez into this.
Yeah.
Because it opens up with Richard Ramirez, somebody trying to escape from them, only to come into a Jason-like killer in the woods.
Yeah.
At a camp that's obviously a Camp Redwood, obviously meant to be a tribute to Camp Crystal Lake.
Yeah.
And it's so Friday the 13th that I always thought, it struck me, I was like, how one of the main characters is attacked by Richard Ramirez and goes on this camping trip to get away. I was like, so this person escaped from a real life horror into an 80s slasher movie, which I thought was kind of funny. Also interesting, it looks like Richard Ramirez is going to play more of a part in the season, so I wonder how they're going to... And I like that, the idea that they're taking the 80s slasher aesthetic and incorporating a real serial killer into it, see how that mixes it up.
And to have him appear twice already in the first episode, as well as the main slasher in the show has already been introduced, Mr. Jingles.
Mr. Jingles, and I love the look of Mr. Jingles. I don't think I've ever seen... It looks like it could have... It looks like a serial killer, a slasher movie villain from the 80s, even though it's not one I've ever seen before.
Yeah.
It completely evokes the look. And of course, you got John Carroll Lynch, who I fucking love, really great character actor, who played the possible Zodiac and David Fincher's Zodiac.
And Twisty.
And Twisty the Clown. I like him. He has that type of presence where he's really scary.
Yeah.
The clothes are pretty goofy to look at, just how the guys have these really high short shorts that show off their bulges.
I call them baby brain shorts.
Baby brain shorts?
Because it looks like they got baby brains hanging out. And the big hair is there. That's another thing.
The colors.
That's another thing that's missing from a lot of 80s retro stuff, is the big hair. There's a lot of hideous hair back then, and there's way too many stylish hairdos in some of these retro
80s, and this one is not... It's not like a glorified version of the 80s. It's what the 80s were actually like.
And you notice even the audio sounds 80s sometimes?
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like it's coming through a VCR.
I really like the color scheme, too. It has kind of a washed-out looking color scheme that kind of evokes the look of 80s film.
Yeah, that was unexpected. I thought because of American Horror Story, it would be very colorful. It would take that aesthetic and make it very colorful, but they washed it out and made it gloomy.
And they're really going to I could tell that they're going through great pains to perfect the look and the style of it. It's kind of fun for horror fans. Obviously, it feels like the first half of the episode is like Friday the 13th, and then it turns into Halloween, and even has a Dr. Loomis type character.
Yeah.
What I found really interesting about it is people always talk about the weird subtext of slasher movies, how people who either have sex or do drugs or defy traditional morals are the ones that always get slashed up. And it's more or less been subtext in slasher movies, more or less been subtext in the slasher films. They don't really state it explicitly.
Yeah.
This way they go out of their way to create a character who explicitly states those themes, the themes of morality and why it's bad to have sex or to do drugs. No, that's pretty cool. They took what was implicit in those movies and make it explicit.
It already has the sexual innuendos and the flirting and playing grab ass. I like the scene in the water where the girl tells the guy, said, "You don't want to be in the water with that lightning rod."
Yeah. That type of dialogue reminds me of all the old Friday the 13th movies or something in Sleepaway Camp. Or
Yeah. So there's a lot of stuff to like in that first episode.
I know it's going to get more complicated because American Horror Story always throws different elements in. However, I get the feeling that it's not going to do it to the extent that it usually does.
Yeah.
I feel like they might incorporate real life more. I don't picture zombies and werewolves, or I don't picture it going on that direction where aliens pop in or they throw in this seems too specific in its style and what they're going for that I could tell that they're gonna mix it up. It's not gonna be a traditional slasher by the end.
If they were going to go light on the twists, I don't think they would have went so predictable, so deliberately an homage in the first episode.
Mm-hmm.
This tells me that they're establishing this world before they take you on a wild ride. That's what I love about this series. Good or bad, they always take you in an unpredictable direction.
Even at its worst, I can't complain about it not being original. Oh yeah, Emma Roberts was good too. Solid.
Oh yeah, we didn't even mention the star of the show. It seems kind of odd seeing her as such a innocent flower.
She seems like the final girl, the innocent girl, the one who's a little bit prudish to everybody, more standoffish, the nice one. A different Emma Roberts, and I'm pretty sure they did that deliberately to play on her image and what you usually expect from her on the show.
And while it's strange seeing her like that, she plays a villain so well. She's still really good at playing the innocent one. She fits. She's really believable. Comes off like that, yeah.
And what else did you watch this week, Mr. Michael?
I watched another found footage film. It's the Gracefield incident from 2017. This is one we just randomly picked. It had a decent looking cover. It's one of those covers where you can tell this could go either way. And I always like a good found footage, but it's a Canadian found footage film written, directed, and starring Matthew Rathie. It's about three couples who are on a cabin on vacation, and a meteorite hits.
Really quick, sorry folks, we were having a little bit of technical difficulties with the audio, so sorry if some of the audio came in a little fuzzy. We just fixed it right now.
Yeah. Anyway, I was talking about the Gracefield incident, about these three couples at a cabin, and a meteorite hits, and of course the dumbass guys in the group go to check it out, and it ends up being an alien invasion type of thing. And it starts out kind of low key. It seems it's like they paid a lot of attention to detail. It's going to be really good, and it was set up to be really good, but I think it suffers from trying too much with too little.
Alien invasion found footage.
Yeah.
That sounds pretty ambitious.
Yeah, and it kind of like what I described with It Chapter 2 is they threw so much at the wall, and a lot of it stuck with It Chapter 2. And with this one, they just kept throwing shit at the wall, and then eventually it just stopped sticking, you know what I mean? Because they just tried too much with too little. And I can tell this you can see the ambition of this writer, director, and also star of it. You can see his ambition in his performance, but he went a little bit too far with the setting up the drama between the couples, and there was a little bit too much relationship drama, and they concentrated on that for too long. And then the alien stuff went too big. You know, they got about halfway through the movie and you were feeling it, and it was still on a realistic type of level. But then he went in another direction because, first of all, you know how the first thing you have to remedy with a found footage movie is why are these people filming the whole time? So they remedied that by having the camera in the guy's eye. I guess the guy got in an accident earlier before the movie, so he has a glass eye, so he puts a recorder in his eye. So then you're going back and forth from the eye camera to his friend's camera, and there's different audio on each one, so it gets kind of confusing sometimes. So that's what I mean. He gets too overly complicated with it, and then it starts breaking its own rules, and it becomes ridiculous in order to play out the things they want to play out. So it's a smaller budget thing that tried to go too big. They had something good, and it kind of went off the rails about 3/4 of the way through. But overall, entertaining movie. There was a really awesome alien invasion film in there somewhere, but it just tried too much with too much drama, too much effects, and too much horror. They should have dialed it down a bit and realized their limitations, and they could have had a great little movie right here.
So now we're going to do our little tribute to the legendary actor Sid Haig.
We're going to start with a little interview that we did with him. We had the privilege of interviewing him at Days of the Dead at the horror convention in 2015.
2016, wasn't it?
It was 2016?
Yeah, it was a Days of the Dead horror convention in 2016. It's just a 5-minute interview that we had with him. But we would like to share it with you. We did it for our variety show, horror show, which airs on the American Horrors Roku channel. But we would like to share that interview with you now. We actually, when we put it on the show, we didn't air the full thing, just a couple minutes of highlights from the interview. So we're going to play for you the full 5-minute interview.
All right, here it is, our exclusive interview with Sid Haig. Enjoy.
Horror show exclusive.
Just let me know when you're ready. All right, we're here with Sid Haig. You know him best as Captain Spaulding from House of a Thousand Corpses and The Devil's Rejects. How are you doing today, Mr. Haig?
I am doing great. How about you?
I'm doing pretty good. So this film, the films that you made with Rob Zombie, prior to that, your work had been primarily in television. You did a lot of work in 70s and 80s films, did a lot of exploitation, not too much in the way of horror. Was this a conscious decision that you moved towards, or is it something that just happened after the House of a Thousand Corpses?
The decision was made after I read the script, and I decided that I could have a lot of fun with the role, and so that's why I took it.
I remember the first time I saw The Devil's Rejects, it kind of left me speechless. I had not seen anything like it. Particular the scene where you terrorized that little kid when you said, "Don't you like clowns? Don't we make you laugh?" You play such an evil character, something really dark. How do you get into character to go to that place?
Within each and every person is every personality type that there is. And you just have to find that Captain Spaulding that's inside you and bring him out. You got to put him back at the end of the day, or else bad shit will happen. But that's the way I work.
Captain Spaulding has become one of the biggest icons in horror the past decade or so. When you were working on these films, did you have any idea it was going to blow up the way it did, or that you would become such a beloved figure within the horror genre?
I had absolutely no idea that it would take off like it did. Yesterday, somebody sent me a picture of a Captain Spaulding food truck. How does that happen? They better be selling chicken.
Tasty fried chicken?
Yeah.
So like I said, you've done so much work. How do you manage to stay busy over the years? How do you keep yourself motivated? Because you've had quite an accomplished career as an actor.
I just keep going. Yeah, and it's the fans, it's the people that come to the conventions and the films and, write to me and everything else, and that just keeps me going, keeps me up.
Do you have a favorite horror movie?
Yes, I have two. I was there opening night. This is how old I am. I was there opening night of The House of Wax with Vincent Price. Okay? And it just scared the crap out of me, because that was like one of the first 3D films. Okay? And it's that, and then Cujo.
Cujo?
Yeah, just think about a 200-pound dog trying to eat your car. Okay?
Do you have any upcoming projects, anything that you're interested in the future?
I have a film that's in post right now called High on the Hog, okay, which I'm very happy about. I play the lead, and through the process of making the film, I became a producer on the film. Yeah.
Do you usually take up that kind of role or in any capacity?
No, I only do things See, a lot of times if a production company can't afford an actor's price, they give them a producer's credit, okay? I don't take credit for anything that I don't do. So I actually acted as one of the producers on the show. I did the job.
Is this I read somewhere is this a film that you worked on with Robert Englund, or from what I understand you have something in production or post-production with Robert Englund?
No.
No? Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time, Mr. Haig.
Okay.
It's an honor meeting you.
All right.
Captain Spaulding, everybody.
Horror show exclusive.
But he was such a genuine, endearing guy, and kind of pulled us in and made us feel comfortable after, I'll admit, his personality kind of made me feel uncomfortable when you first get around him, because he's very intimidating, very larger than life, and this very deep, booming voice, and he seems to have like a I don't give a shit attitude. And then when you talk to him, he's really endearing and really cool. And we kind of connected with him right there,
We had been such big fans of him for a long time, so I was a little bit struck by seeing him there.
Yeah, and I had met him at a signing at Dark Delicacies bookstore in Burbank, and he was with Adam Green and Joe Lynch and all them, and we were kind of going down the table, and he was being kind of loud, kind of boisterous. So the kids were kind of young at the time, so they were a little intimidated. I said, "Go, that's Captain Spaulding. Go say hi." And they were really intimidated, and they didn't know how it would go. And when they went over in front of them, he talked to them so sweet, and he was so cool to them. It just made their day.
There was another convention that I went to where we saw him at. He was always really, really good with fans. He always seemed like he was excited to be there, like he really enjoyed being in the presence of fans, and you could tell that he did it for the love. He was at so many conventions, so many people got to meet him. He was always really generous with his time, always really friendly. Like you said, he was a very loud and boisterous personality, and he could seem a little bit rough, but if you talk to him, cool fucking guy, really cool person. And I could see a little bit of him in his characters after speaking him and meeting him a couple times. I could definitely see his personality being put into his characters. As different as they are, I could see the human behind them.
Yeah, there's always that personality and that type of delivery, like when we watched that exploitation movie last night.
Yes.
A Big Dollhouse. Sid Haig was born Sidney Eddie Mosesian. He was born July 13th, 1939 in Fresno, and he died September 21st, 2019.
Fresno, California.
Yeah. He started his career at age 7 when his parents realized he was wasn't very coordinated, so he was very clumsy. So they got him dance lessons, and by age 7 he was getting paid to dance. And then later on after that, he was bitten by the music bug, and he became a paid musician like around the 50s, late 50s, and he played drums. So he was in a band called the T-Birds. So then he was bitten by the acting bug, and his first acting job was in Jack Hill's student film at UCLA. It was called The Host, and that was 1960.
He went on to make a ton of movies with Jack Hill after that.
Yeah, he did Spider Baby, Foxy Brown, The Big Birdcage,
the Big Dollhouse.
Yeah, and
Coffee.
Yeah, Coffee was the other one he did with
Sid Haig and Pam Grier.
Pam Grier, yeah.
He was in a lot of movies. Jack Hill seemed to always cast him and Pam Grier in their movies, and Sid Haig was in like a lot of like this interesting 70s exploitation, like women in prison films, which is a very unusual subgenre, but also a lot of blaxploitation films, like and always with Pam Grier, and always in these projects directed by Jack Hill.
And then THX 1138
with George Lucas
film, yeah. And he also did tons of
television
TV, starting way back in '62. He did The Untouchables. He even did The Lucy Show. He works with Lucille Ball in '65. He was on Batman, Star Trek, Gunsmoke, Get Smart, Mission Impossible, Buck Rogers, Dukes of Hazzard, T.J. Hooker, The A-Team, Fall Guy. So I grew up with Sid Haig before I even knew who he was.
He's on so many when you actually look at his credits in television, he was like on every big TV show in the 50s and 60s. involved in some way or another.
And then in 1992, he actually retired from acting because he was sick of playing heavies, what he called it. His quote says, "I'll never play another stupid heavy again, and I don't care if that means that I never work ever."
Basically, a heavy is just a stock villain that's put there just for the purpose of making the hero, the protagonist of the story, look good, and they're usually very interchangeable characters.
Yeah.
They even talk about it in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, where that's almost like an insult to an actor to be just always cast as the heavy.
Yeah, and he was working a lot and getting a lot of parts, and I'm sure being the heavy wouldn't have been such a big burden for him if he had gotten more recognition for being the great actor that he is. Like, he rose to prominence as Captain Spaulding, but before that, he was very much a character actor that you would see a lot in a lot of different movies and a lot of different TV series, but just never that breakout role.
If you were in the 70s, if you were around and you were into exploitation film and you went to grindhouses, you probably knew who Sid Haig was, though. Yeah. That's mostly where, I'd say during that period, that's where most of his fan base was, because he's in so many classic exploitation movies. It's kind of hard to believe. It's like he really dominated that. He really dominated that for a good while.
I find it so crazy that he rose to his greatest fame after he retired.
He has actually almost got the part of Marcellus Wallace in Pulp Fiction.
Yeah, and Tarantino is actually what brought him out of retirement for Jackie Brown in '97. He played a judge where he got to be in another scene with Pam Grier.
A judge sentencing her to prison.
Yeah.
Much like how Pam Grier was always in prison in the movies.
Yeah.
And the song 99 Years, is which is from the movie The Big Doll House, is playing right before Sid Haig sentences her to prison.
Yeah, that was so great.
I read that he almost could have had the role of Marcellus Wallace, but he turned it down because of some of the locations would be a little bit hard to cover, and he thought it might be more like television. And he said it was a big regret of his career that he didn't pursue it further.
Yeah, because the call sheet said one day, multiple locations, but he didn't realize that when Tarantino says one day, he means that he goes to film that scene on a certain day, and if it gets done in that day, it gets done in that day. If it gets done 2 weeks later, it gets done 2 weeks later. That's what Sid didn't realize.
And he thought it was more like television. It was going to be more like a television production, and I can understand how that would be a big... I mean, there's no guarantee he would have got that part anyway, but he was in heavy consideration.
Yeah.
And he could have pursued it harder and possibly got it, which would have been an interesting alternate history to have Marcellus Wallace be Sid Haig. That would have revived his career before...
Oh, definitely.
That would have revived his career before Rob Zombie in House of a Thousand Corpses.
So it's Tarantino that first brought him out of retirement, but it was just for this little small part. It wasn't really until Rob Zombie put him in his Feel So Numb video in 2001, and then it was 2 years after that when he put him in the House of a Thousand Corpses.
Well, he actually filmed House of a Thousand Corpses in 2000. And it didn't get released until 3 years. So he worked on the film with him and then did the music video, but the music video was released to the public first.
Okay.
Because when Rob Zombie did House of a Thousand Corpses, which is, of course, what brought Sid Haig back as Captain Spaulding, it was funded by Universal Studios, and you could kind of tell by the look of it and some of the sets and everything. Once Universal finally saw the finished cut, they thought it was morally reprehensible and unreleasable, so they shelved it. So he had to wait a few years to get the rights back. When Lionsgate finally got the rights back and he was able to release it how he wanted it. Actually, from what I understand, there's an unrated cut that we've never seen. Would have been NC-17, and it's 17 minutes longer. Where's the footage, Rob?
I know. I have no idea why that was never released.
I would fucking love to check it out. So that was one that his comeback role was delayed because he was in a movie that most studios were afraid to touch.
So finally in 2003 it was released, and he started getting the recognition he deserved by getting Best Supporting Actor in the 13th Annual Fangoria Chainsaw Awards, and also got an induction into the Horror Hall of Fame that year.
I think that instantly became a horror icon, Captain Spaulding.
Yeah.
It was like... something about him and his presence and the makeup and the way that Sid Haig makes himself look, because he makes himself look a lot more unpresentable in those films than he is in real life. It's one of those things that's become so iconic within the horror genre that it's up there to me. It's like a modern day version of Freddy or Jason is Captain Spaulding. Unlike well, not Freddy, but something like Jason or Michael Myers, he actually has a lot more personality than most horror movie villains or horror movie icons do.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the reasons his stands out and why it's so important to his career is that nobody else could have been Captain Spaulding but Sid Haig.
Yeah.
Sid Haig is Captain Spaulding, and Rob Zombie actually wrote the part for him and was bent on getting him in that role.
Yeah, and he was instantly iconic in House of a Thousand Corpses. And you think, how could he top that? It's pitch perfect performance. It's already
stood out.
It already stood out as one of the great horror clown performances. And then he comes with Devil's Rejects, and
the
holy
sequel
shit,
in 2005.
It was even better. We got to see more Captain Spaulding, and we loved what we saw. And I knew that the more they showed of him, the more we were going to like him. And oh my God, was he good? And I think that was his best work, Devil's Rejects.
Like I said in the interview when I asked him, when I remember first seeing the Devil's Rejects, that scene where he knocks out PJ Souls and gets in the car with her little son, and he's looking terrified at him, and he says, "What's the matter, kid? Don't you like clowns? Don't we make you laugh? Aren't we fucking funny?" Yeah. And then he threatens to kill him.
I'll kill your whole fucking family.
If I'm gonna come back here, and if you don't have a reason why you don't like clowns, I'm gonna kill you and your whole fucking family. And then he starts like shouting at him, going, yeah, 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 yeah. And then starts cackling after. I was like, that scene, fucking, I don't know. That was like an instantly classic moment. When I saw that, I was like, oh man, that was fucking horrifying right there. That's going to be an instantly iconic scene in the horror genre.
And have you ever seen a scene that was so horrifying that was that hilarious?
No.
At the same time.
That's one of the great things about Captain Spaulding is that it's weird because he's kind of the patriarch and the leader of the family, and you see that more in the Devil's Rejects. Yeah. And like I said, Mike and I actually both rewatched House of a Thousand Corpses and the Devil's Rejects recently. What makes his patriarchy interesting and what makes the fact that he's such a horror icon and one of the great horror movie clowns, do you ever see him kill anybody on camera?
No.
The only thing I remember is him in a shootout at the end of Devil's Rejects. He only knocks PJ Souls out. He never participates in any of the carnage. In House of a Thousand Corpses, he's just leading people there.
Yeah.
And in the Devil's Rejects, it's his kids, Otis and Baby, that are the psychotic ones and that are out of control. And he even seems to be overwhelmed by them sometimes, where he looks at them when...
I could argue, like, punching a little kid's mom in the face and knocking her out right in front of him is kind of just as bad as killing someone. And then
scaring the shit out of the kid. I always found that very interesting, is that he's horrifying, but he seems more violent than he actually was until after the movie's over. You think, wait, who did he even kill in that movie? Yeah. It's just his presence is so fucking outlandish in the way it stands out.
Did you do like me and imagine what that kid's life was like? He's like, you see him as a teenager still looking over his shoulder.
Yeah, I think that would cause serious PTSD to see your mom knocked out by this horrifying looking clown.
Yeah, like this kid's life flashes before your eyes and you're just traumatized.
But he's so likable in that movie at the same time. He seems like somebody you'd want to have a beer with when he meets up with his brother Charlie, when they're just laughing and having a good time, when they're doing coke, and when they're smoking joints. Like a lot of the Firefly family in the Rob Zombie films, he seems like he would be a really cool guy to be around, kind of fun if you weren't so psychotic. So yeah, that's definitely Captain Spaulding. Arguably the stand. I mean, some people might argue for Jigsaw as the best horror movie villain of 2000s, that decade from 2000 to 2009. For me, it's Captain Spaulding. I think that's a more personality.
Yeah, much more
flair. More acting verve.
Yeah.
Something that pops off the screen a lot more. And more for an actor to sink into.
Real quick, while we're on Devil's Rejects, I just want to say why I think this movie is perfect. I'm just going to do a quick rundown, starting with Captain Spaulding's dream sequence of him having sex with that woman, with that hooker.
And then getting killed.
Fucking awesome. So it's that. Amazing rival, William Forsythe. Banjo and Sullivan are the greatest fucking victims ever. The song Midnight Rider. Michael Berryman from Hills Have Eyes. Captain Spaulding, PJ Souls, and the Kid scene. Forsythe and Easterbrook twice. Otis with Banjo and Sullivan, where he delivers his awesome lines and I want you to pray to your God. A Baby in the Hotel with the girls. The husband's face being attached to the girl and her running off.
The roadkill scene.
Yes, when she gets killed on the road. Spalding and Baby taunting Otis in the truck.
Tutti fucking fruity.
A James Gang song. The Firefly Clan partying while Wydell yells at himself in the mirror. Fucking awesome. The Torture of the Firefly Clan by Wydell. And Wydell stalking Baby and the big climax.
Oh, the Freebird climax.
Yes.
That song Freebird is so overused, but it had already been fucking overused by the time The Devil's Rejects came out.
Yeah, now it takes on a whole new...
I can't imagine any film ever actually topping the use of Freebird.
No.
After seeing The Devil's Rejects. And I have to agree with you, Michael. The Devil's Rejects for me is one of the great horror films of the 21st century. And one of the few Texas Chainsaw Massacre tributes that actually captures some of the insanity and griminess of what made the Texas Chainsaw Massacre special. It's the only one of the tributes that really gets to what made that movie so horrifying, and it puts a modern spin on it by giving the family a little bit more personality and focusing on them instead of the victims. It kind of gives it a more, I don't know, dare I say, psychotic spin by spending more time with...
It has the Texas Chainsaw Massacre aesthetic, but he brought some wholly original horror icons out of that.
Yeah, completely. That don't feel like a ripoff of Texas. In fact, Captain Spaulding is as worlds away from Leatherface as you could get. Same with Otis Driftwood is worlds away from Chop Top.
Yeah.
Or any of the other villains. But yeah, so that's what I love about it. It's a great tribute to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and the hardcore 70s horror movies while making something completely new and creating new horror icons for a new generation that are really distinctive, really stand out on their own. I mean, besides Captain Spaulding, you got Otis Driftwood and Baby Firefly, who are also fucking phenomenal villains.
Sid Haig did have a much more successful career once that took off, but he never did anything as great as Captain Spaulding. He did some
really good work
here, really good work here and there. Like I haven't seen it yet, but Little Big Top from 2006 is supposed to be really good. Apparently, he was very proud of that. He said it was one of the best things he ever done. So I definitely have to see that. He was excellent in Hatchet 3 in 2013. Bone Tomahawk, of course, in 2015.
That's another interesting one with Bone Tomahawk because he only has a small part, but he put himself in one of the great modern horror films, and he really fits into the Western world. The gruffness, the rugged look that he has.
Yeah.
The weather-worn face really, really goes with the aesthetic of a horror Western.
And he's in it just long enough to solidify his place in it, and where he's not just a supporting character, he's like a nice little memorable character there at the beginning to set up the whole story.
Yes.
And hit the dynamic between him and David Arquette.
Which is such an odd pairing, isn't it?
Yeah, I thought so too.
I mean, it brings up its own horror movie associations by seeing Captain Spaulding with Officer Dewey from Scream.
And another movie that we've not seen yet, but I do plan on seeing this because he was very proud of this one, High on the Hog, from just came out in 2019, but I believe he made it a few years ago.
Yeah, he actually, in the interview we just played, he was actually speaking about High on the Hog as something he was very, very proud of. And this was in 2016, so apparently it took a few years for this movie to get out.
Yeah, so now that it's finally out, we'll definitely check that one out. But that's just one of 70 movies that he did. And it's around 70 TV shows, but on many of them he was on there many times. So it's around 350 television shows he was on altogether.
Jesus, that's quite a career.
Oh yeah,
he was already a cult icon, which is why Rob Zombie had him in mind for Captain Spaulding, and Tarantino had him in mind for Marcellus Wallace in Pulp Fiction, because I know that he was never an icon to the mainstream, but if you're one of those kinds of guys who was influenced by the 70s films and all that, Sid Haig is a hero to that generation of people. So it must have been pretty interesting to discover in his later years that he had a fan base there that was actually going to be influential in bringing him back. Because even after Jackie Brown, Sid Haig was also in Kill Bill Volume 2, and he plays a bartender that tells off Michael Madsen's character, Bud. And he tells him, "Bud, can't you tell time?"
Yeah.
He got to work with Tarantino a couple times. Got to work with Rob Zombie multiple times. I mean, even when he wasn't a lead, he had a small parts in Halloween, the Halloween remake.
Yeah.
He had another small part in The Lords of Salem, which is an underrated horror film in my opinion.
Yeah.
And really, really accomplished career. But I think like I said, Captain Spaulding is what brought him back. And what's cool is that he said that at age 60, Rob Zombie had said that he was invigorated again, reinvigorated by acting again because he had found a new audience by age 60, which is probably the last thing he would have expected. And not only that, to find an audience of younger people and to find out a lot of these people ended up going because of his role as Captain Spaulding. A lot of people went back and checked out a lot of older Sid Haig movies because of him and Tarantino. So his reputation went up a lot after that.
Just like we're doing, we're discovering all these old Jack Hill movies that are really good, especially Spider Baby. That was so good.
Listen to this podcast, or I'll cut off your genitals and feed them to your kids.
We're going to review Spider Baby now. This is one of Sid Haig's earliest film roles. 1967, one of the early Jack Hill films, and it is a very odd but very clever exploitation movie.
Yeah, it's called Spider Baby, or The Maddest Story Ever Told. And it's about a caretaker played by Lon Chaney Jr., who takes care of 3 deranged siblings after their father dies. And boy, they're deranged. And Sid Haig is one of the deranged siblings, but he just mentally challenged. He's not deranged like the 2 little girls are.
But he does become violent. They're all afflicted with what they call Mary syndrome, which is named after the family. The malady causes its victims to enter a state of age regression that starts at the age of 10 and continues throughout the remainder of the person's life, rendering them with the intelligence of a child. The final generation of the family has been entrusted to the care of the family's chauffeur, who is Lon Chaney Jr., and all is well for these odd people until a greedy branch of the family decides that they want to relieve the family of its home. Well, another interesting thing about the malady is that apparently if they eat meat, it turns them into savage cannibals. That are uncontrollable. So after Sid Haig eats meat in that movie, he starts becoming a little deranged, even though he comes across as innocent. And what I like about this movie, and what I liked about Sid Haig's role in this movie, is that it's a fairly large role, and it's a significant role because he's one of the 3 people, one of the 3 siblings, and he makes a big impression with no dialogue. He says maybe 2 or 3 words. It's all facial expressions, acting, but he really stands out. He's very quirky. The way that he moves about.
That face just leaps off the screen. Has such character in that face. Ever since he was young and skinny like that.
So it's all just expressive acting done with eyes, gestures, facial movements, and it conveys a lot about the character just without any dialogue at all. So it just showed he didn't even need dialogue to make an impression or to sketch a character or sketch a believable character out.
Yeah, and he was very inspired to be in a movie with Lon Chaney.
Oh man, that must have been awesome to be working with a legend like that.
Yeah, and he was saying that he got a hold of a Lon Chaney life mask, and then someone done a Lon Chaney life mask of him, so they're hanging together in his house.
And what's interesting about this movie, most of the exploitation cinema that I'm more familiar with has mostly been the 70s. It's weird to see them going this shocking in 1967.
Yeah.
Because there's some scenes of people getting slashed up, and obviously it's nothing by today's standards, but it's still pretty brutal, and I'm kind of surprised that that's in a 1967 film. The treatment of the material almost treats mentally challenged people like they're... I mean, it's obviously not a good portrayal of people who are mentally challenged.
It actually has some dialogue to hint at that, right?
Yeah, there's dialogue to hint that people who are mentally challenged are bound to become savages.
Yeah.
So it's not politically correct in any way, and it's definitely wrong. There's no defending that. But it's from a different era of filmmaking where exploitation cinema was made to be salacious or scandalous or exploit, and that's why it's exploitation, to exploit different things that you don't see in movies. And it's very deliberate, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can tell they're not going for anything close to reality.
Yeah, and I thought that scene was pretty graphic when you first see that one little dark-haired girl, and she lures that guy to stick his body into the window, and then
she slashes him up pretty violently, and
she shuts the window on him so he can't move. So she captures him like a spider and just starts slashing his face. I mean, they don't show the knife hitting his face, but you see her like slashing away with glee, and it's like it's disturbing, especially knowing it's from '67.
And those girls are fucking scary.
Yeah, and the other little blonde girl, she keeps talking about everybody hating everybody. She keeps bringing up hate throughout the whole movie.
They're believably maniacal and kind of frightening.
Yeah.
But it's kind of weird. You end up rooting for them by the end because the people who are trying to take advantage of this family are worse because they should know better.
Yeah, they're so unlikable, and they keep ignoring all the warning signs. And the way Lon Chaney...
Out of greed.
Yeah, and the way Lon Chaney reacts with them... Like he tries to get them to understand, like, no, you're not dealing with regular children. You know, you can't just spend the night. No.
You can't just be here.
Yeah.
Especially with those two girls, they're pretty psychotic. But even by the end, after Sid Haig consumes meat, he becomes savage and cannibal and starts attacking. Becomes really strange. A little bit, it's kind of over the top. It's very quirky. It's pretty brutal for its time.
Yeah.
It's very exploitation, but I don't know. It has a quality that lives up, that it still stands up over time because it's so fucking odd that you can't help but be entertained by everything that you see on screen. There's not a moment of that movie where I was bored.
Yeah. And for me, it has just the right amount of oddity and just the right amount of realism. Like, it's just got just enough realism to ground it in some type, to make you relate to the characters.
This is actually a movie Rob Zombie loves a lot, and it's actually influenced some of his horror. And this is one of the reasons he wanted Sid Haig for the role of Captain Spaulding.
So you've seen a lot of visual acting, but you really see his personality come out when he has all the dialogue in The Big Dollhouse.
So that's the other Sid Haig movie we watched. So the last movie we just talked about, Spider Baby, is exploitation, but it's a horror movie, horror exploitation. This is not a horror movie. It's a women in prison movie with Pam Grier, and this movie is so fucking ridiculous. It's hard to believe that it's real or that it ever got made.
Yeah. And Sid Haig was one of the standouts in it. I mean, you watch this movie mostly for all the beautiful women and all the shenanigans in the prison, but Sid Haig comes in and really shines whenever he's on the screen.
It's a really entertaining movie, The Big Dollhouse, but there's nothing about it that I find remotely believable.
Yeah.
But it's very entertaining in a trashy lizard brain way because it's so ridiculous. When you watch it, you're like, what kind of fucking women's prison is this? There's no women's prison like that. There's like every woman in there is gorgeous and almost looks perfect and beautiful. I'm like, come the fuck on. You know, if you go to a prison when they're not all going to be models, and there's like 10 of them in a cell?
Yeah.
So ridiculous. How are there 10 fucking women in a cell? They get high in there. They shoot up heroin. They have cats.
Yeah.
There's a sadistic warden who pulls them up for weird sexual torture.
Yeah, they have like a BDSM like torture chamber where they hook like suction cups to their nipples and shock them, and
really salacious material, a lot of nudity. And Pam Grier, who I fucking love, is a standout in this movie. And one of the most shocking scenes I saw is Sid Haig actually fills up Pam Grier in this movie, and you could tell he's actually filling her up because he puts his hand underneath her shirt and starts really fondling her. I was like, wow, this is total exploitation, just exploiting all that stuff. But Sid Haig is a standout in this movie. He's the lead male character.
Yeah, but what's even funnier about that scene when he's feeling up Pam Grier, he's feeling her up because he has some mail, and he says, I've got some mail, and I'm not going to give it to you unless you let me feel you up. So she's letting him feel her up, and then he hands her the mail, and it's for one of the other cellmates. Mm-hmm. So he like tricked her into letting him feel her up.
And it seems like the women mostly try to take advantage of the men and their horniness and how they want to fuck them all, so they just use that to their advantage. And Sid Haig is actually the one who helps orchestrate their breakout, which is one of the best things about the movie. Is the last 30 minutes is fucking babes and bullets and violence and explosions and ridiculous shit happening. It's so fucking absurd. The prison blowout, you got Sid Haig yelling charging through fences in a big truck and yelling,
Yeah.
"Yeehaw!" and that. And it's weird because there's a rape scene in this movie.
Yeah.
One of the sadistic wardens, they take her along and they have Sid Haig rape her, all these women, because as revenge. And it's so odd and so uncomfortable and so
And they
non-PC, and they treat it
like such a fun thing.
Yeah, they treat it like such a fun thing, and she looks horrified, and he looks fucking creepy.
Yeah.
And I don't know, such an odd movie. It's something, these exploitation movies really capture a certain era. These films could never be made today in this culture, in this climate. In fact, I'm really shocked that that movie was made back then, the Big Dollhouse. I'm surprised that all these beautiful women, some of them actually pretty good actresses, agreed to do such fucking trashy material. Such overtly trashy material.
And let's face it, even compared to Spider Baby, it was all kind of pointless.
It was.
But you don't care.
It's so fucking entertaining that it's hard to even care by the end. We were like, this was totally unrealistic. It's not believable.
Yeah, the story is nonsense.
The story is nonsense. It's completely absurd, but it all works to the movie's benefit because it's something that you could turn your brain off and have a good time with. And it's not like the mindless blockbusters that you see that you turn your brain off for that are just fucking monotonous and dull. This, like I said, it's totally ridiculous. But there's personality. You could tell that there's an excitement just to do, let's see if we can do this. Let's see if we can do that. Let's all do all this crazy shit at the wall. And most of it works strangely. Sid Haig really works in the movie. He actually probably has the best performance in the movie.
Yeah.
He's kind of like a hero and villain at the same time. I don't know how to describe it.
And you never know which direction he's going to go.
One of the funniest scenes is when they get ambushed after their breakout and one of the chicks comes out, one of the girls, and she has these two big machine guns and one in each arm, and she's dressed all scantily, and then she just starts shooting up everything and shaking around. It was just so funny. It's like, okay. Oh, man.
Like blatantly gratuitous.
Yeah, it's just gratuitousness for gratuitous sake.
Yeah.
But it's a blast to watch, especially if you like 70s exploitation movie, and some of the acting really pops off the screen. Everything about it is totally absurd and pointless, but it's entertaining. It was very, very entertaining.
But how did people like Jack Hill make movies like they're this titillating without seeming like a porno? It never seemed to dip down into porno standards. Even though there was depravity and
nudity,
nude women everywhere, and sex and violence. It never felt like cheap
and
enough.
rape.
Yeah, it never felt like cheap, like X-rated. It always felt just for titillation, you know.
Because the approach to it seems more fun. I guess that's, and I know that's not going to go over well with some people to say the approach is fun, giving the subject matter of it.
Yeah.
Let's be honest, that's how all these exploitation movies were. You have to look at them through a different lens.
And while my loins appreciated all the titillation and the nudity, I much more preferred Spider Baby myself.
Spider Baby is as a piece of filmmaking, as a storyline, it's more substantial film. There's a little more substance to it, and it feels like less of a pastiche.
Yeah.
That's the best way I could put it. It seems genuine.
It's not as ridiculous.
It's not as ridiculous, even though it's still pretty damn ridiculous.
Yeah.
We got to go back and see a couple of Sid Haig, Jack Hill exploitation movies, and I had a blast. I didn't regret it at all.
Yeah, definitely. And if I would have known these were even on Prime, I would have watched them already. But they don't come up in the main search. That's what I don't like about Prime and Shudder and stuff. You don't see everything that's available.
If you have Amazon Prime in the US and you want to check out some Sid Haig films and see a lot of exploitation, just type in Sid Haig Prime in the search, and you'll get a lot of Sid Haig movies. There's a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them are free to watch on Prime. A lot of the ones that he did with Jack Hill.
Yeah, and in recent years, he did a lot of actor for hire stuff. So he did some clunkers, but don't judge him for that. Like, really dive into this guy's filmography, because he done a lot of cool shit. And we need to make sure that this guy lives on forever, because he's a personality and a person that deserves to be remembered.
Definitely, he definitely left an imprint on the horror genre, one that you can't replace. Like I said, just getting the news was so shocking because I had watched The Devil's Rejects, because we just saw 3 from Hell, which is now we know one of Sid Haig's last performances. And he's only in it for 10 minutes.
Yeah.
It's great in the movie, but I had to go back and rewatch The Devil's Rejects and then House of a Thousand Corpses, and I was getting on that kick. And like a couple hours after I was done watching House of a Thousand Corpses, I read it on the social media feed.
Well, we just reported last week that he was on the road to recovery after the accident, and then.
And to be honest, I guess from what I heard, he was a little sick before. The family hasn't said to the extent of what was going on, and that's their choice. I mean, people deserve their privacy.
I usually try not to let myself get sad when someone lives such a long life, but just the fact that he was still going and he was about to do a great film and couldn't do it, that's kind of what makes me really sad.
He said recently, I believe it was on the Movie Crypt podcast with Adam Green and Joe Lynch, that he had no intentions to retire until he died because he loved working so much. And that's really awesome to think that these films brought him out of retirement and reinvigorated that spark in him, made him want to do it, because he was at the point for years where he was just done with it all. Yeah. And then after a certain age, he decided he wanted to do it all the way until the end of his life.
And he didn't want to do heavies anymore, but Captain Spaulding is so much more than just another heavy.
No, there's nothing typical about Captain Spaulding.
No.
More personality than most heavies would require.
You're listening to Ghostman Rivera's Horror Show podcast.
I made the statement on the podcast last week that I have the feeling that we're going to have Sid Haig around for a very long time still.
Yeah.
And it makes me sad that we actually don't. But a part of that was just me really, really wanting to believe that we still had years left of this man, of seeing more work come out from him.
Well, we still have many years to spend with Sid Haig because he left plenty behind for us to reminisce on. So rest in peace, Sid Haig. You will be sorely missed by everyone in the horror community and everyone who ever knew you and ever
had the chance or the opportunity to meet you. You were one of a kind, and the fact that he loved being around fans so much and took such a delight in it, and the way that he would talk to his fans shows a genuine person, a genuine personality. No, like, you know what I mean? Just a completely real person, easy to approach.
And someone like him who was willing to give us that sit-down interview when he was clearly stressed that day.
Yeah, that's
he didn't want to give that interview, but he did anyway. One
last thing for sure. When we approached him the interview, we'd asked him if you could do an interview with, would you be interested in doing an interview? And it was kind of towards the end of the convention. It was already winding down, and he looked a little wound up. We couldn't resist the opportunity.
People had gathered around his table so much during the entire convention that we couldn't even get over there. So we had to wait till the end, till things kind of thinned out, and then we just walked over there and went for it.
And his response to us was, and in typical Captain Spaulding fashion, he's like, "Are you fucking serious?" Not in an angry way, but just kind of an exaggeration. He's like, "Well, the convention's almost fucking over." And we're like, "Yeah." And he's like, "All right, then come on down." That was his response. And I always said, cool. I'll always remember that, because he had that type of boisterous personality, but it wasn't a hostile personality. It was boisterous and very warm. He just didn't he just was very open in the way that he spoke his mind. And the fact that I'll always remember that moment where he's like, "Are you fucking serious?" And he's like, "All right, come on down."
And he didn't show a bit of annoyance in the interview. He gave those answers willingly and gladly.
Yes, really cool interview. Love talking to Sid Haig. And I'm glad that we did it, because it's a moment that we'll always cherish and we'll always have to look back on.
Yes, I'll never forget that, and I'll never forget how sweet he was to my kids, and what a great moment that was. So, rest in peace, Sid Haig.
Yes.
Before we go, we just wanted to give a little update on what's going on with Pickle's Horror Show. We hope you guys are watching the second season. We're working our asses off on it.
The episode that just aired, because by the time you hear this, the episode that just aired will have had 2 short films. One was The Purge, which is a parody of The Purge, directed by one of our collaborators from Gargoyle Media, Clarence Williams. Another, Watch This Movie or I'll Gut You, with our wonderful host Elliot. And The Green Man, a short film that I wrote and directed for the show. This upcoming week, we're going to be having our special, I believe.
Yes.
So check that out. It's going to be a 40-minute to an hour-long special that's gonna have a brand new short with Mike and I, as well as a film submission and podcast highlights. Actually, we're going to be airing our highlights of our interview with Hart D. Fisher, our episode 40 of our podcast.
You must keep up with the whole story of the show. Listen to the podcast every week. Watch the show every week. We're working really hard on this, putting a lot of creativity, a lot of hard work into it. We have 11 shorts. This is just shorts. This doesn't count little segments that we do, little news segments, little review segments, little intros, outros, and stuff like that. Just the short films we're going to film from now until the end of the season in December. 11 short films.
Also, if you missed our recent episode on Friday, we're releasing this podcast around Saturday. You can catch the rerun of it Sunday night around 6:30, between 6:30 and 8:30ish Pacific. Again, for those who don't know, it's on the American Horrors channel, which is a Roku app. So if you have Roku, just look up American Horrors, and our show comes on there. You'll see a lot of cool horror movies and exploitation films on there. And we come on there every Friday night and Sundays with reruns. And if you don't have Roku, you could watch it directly from the website www.americanhorrors.com or strictlystreaming.com. You could watch it either way through one of those.
Yeah, and if you tune in, the time that we come on Friday nights is 6:30-ish p.m. That's Pacific time, and 8:30 Central.
However that translates.
Yeah, and if you tune in at that time and we're not on, it'll probably be a movie, so just stick around and watch the movie, and then we'll be on right after the movie. So we get some people asking us why it's not on at the time that we say, and it comes on sometimes at 7:30.
Usually comes on within 20 to 40 minutes, I'd say, 20 to 40 minutes of 6:30, sometimes right on time.
Yeah, but the movie is always entertaining. I've been told a few times when someone tunes in and they see the end of the movie before the show comes on, they're like, man, I wish I would have tuned in earlier to check that whole movie out. So you won't regret it if you tune in a little early and check out the movies and stuff on American Horrors. And there's much more to come, so stick around every Friday on American Horrors and then listen to the podcast every Saturday.
All right. Until next week, happy horror.
Happy horror, everyone.